Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
President Trump prepares to address the nation. Welcome to the Wednesday edition on this 33rd day of the war with Iran, and a commander-in-chief set to update the country on the way forward. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Kailey, the markets are feeling very optimistic about what we might hear this evening, even as the White House tells us he'll reiterate a 2 to 3 week process here in getting out of Iran.
Yeah, an official telling Bloomberg on background that he's going to reiterate this 2 to 3 week timeline, give an operational update. In other words, Joe, we may not get anything materially new or different in this address from the White House this evening, even as we are getting the president posting on Truth Social today the idea that Iran has asked for a ceasefire and he will think about it if the Strait of Hormuz opens up. Of course, Iran pushes back on the notion that such a request was made.
Suggesting that is fake news. It's going to be interesting to hear from the president, and we'll let you know that they have told reporters to stand by around the president's Easter lunch today. He might actually take some questions because earlier made history by stopping by the Supreme Court, Kailey, to witness opening arguments in this case about birthright citizenship. He's got a busy day today. It's going to be a long one.
Yeah, certainly there is a lot going on, and he's not just weighing in on the Supreme Court of the United States or on geopolitics. He also just took to Truth Social to say that he's going to have Congress on a partisan basis, Republican only, bypassing the filibuster, pass funding for ICE and CBP. I assume the president is referencing another reconciliation package in this Truth Social post, Joe, and he says he wants it on his desk by June 1st.
To bypass the filibuster. Of course, he needs to drop a budget at some point as well, which we're all ears on. And I'll tell you, this is a huge day for politics and, of course, for American history. As the Artemis II launch is set for this evening, we could have 4 Americans on their way to the moon for the first time since the Apollo era. Before the president even speaks this evening, we've got a lot to talk about with the former vice president, don't we?
Indeed, we do. Mike Pence will be here in just a moment with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. But first, we head up to New York headquarters to check on these markets as the second quarter opens. Charlie Pellet has a look for us. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. You guys summed it up nicely. The essence of what's going on today: optimism about hopes that the war in the Middle East may be nearing a conclusion. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all advancing as I run the GIP screen on the Bloomberg. Just about the best level of the day right now on the S&P. The S&P, by the way, 6602 where we stand now, up 74. That is a gain of 1.1%. The Dow up 413 points, up 0.9%. NASDAQ Composite Index rebounding again today, up 1.7%. Russell 2000 Index up 1.6%. All of this with the VIX, Wall Street so-called fear gauge, below 24. The 10-year 4.29% with a 2-year 3.79%. Spot gold is up 2.6%, $47.89 the ounce on the precious metal. West Texas Intermediate crude 99.81 a barrel, a drop right now of 1.6%. Brent, the global benchmark, still above $101, down today by 2.5%. Traders, by the way, do see a roughly 35% chance now of a Federal Reserve interest rate cut in December, and SpaceX is said to have filed confidentially for an IPO. Again, recapping here, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all higher. S&P up by 1.1%, the 10-year 4.30%, the VIX below 24, and West Texas Intermediate crude 99.85 a barrel. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet checking on these markets for us. Thank you so much. Just after 1 p.m. Eastern time. And of course, that means it is about 8 hours from now that we expect to hear from President Trump speaking to the nation from the White House at 9 p.m. Eastern on the war in Iran. A U.S. official, a White House official telling Bloomberg that it is going to be an operational update on that war and that he will reiterate the timeline he outlined in the Oval Office when speaking with reporters yesterday, that this will continue for 2 to 3 more weeks.
I had one goal. They will have no nuclear weapon. And that goal has been attained. They will not have nuclear weapons. But we're finishing the job. And I think within maybe 2 weeks, maybe a couple of days longer to do the job. But we want to knock out every single thing they have. Now, it's possible that we'll make a deal before that.
And maybe he will be speaking about a deal this evening. There's so much we don't know about this address that we will bring you live, of course, here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Again, it's at 9 p.m. Eastern, so the president will be getting in living rooms across the country in a fairly rare primetime address. Will he talk about troops? Will he talk about withdrawal? is the market optimism justified? Just some of the questions that we have for the former vice president. I'm glad to say Mike Pence is with us, as promised, former vice president of the United States, the founder of Advancing American Freedom. Mr. Vice President, welcome back. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Good to be back.
What's your anticipation, your expectation for what the president might say this evening? And are you worried that the U.S. could leave the region with the Strait of Hormuz still closed?
Well, first, let me say I think every American should be proud of the extraordinary work our men and women in uniform have done over the last month. I mean, taking the fight directly to the leading state sponsor of terrorism in the world. Iran has been a source of violence and mayhem, has claimed American lives, lives of our allies, and sown its malign influence across the region for 47 years. So I'm proud of our troops. I'm also proud that President Trump pulled the trigger and made the decision to move against Iran. To simply cannot allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon, but to be able to hit the regime and simply say that the time of you sowing terror across the region are over, I think was action whose time has come. But I will tell you, I'm pleased the president's taking his message directly to the American people in prime time tonight. Not that the administration has been shy about explaining their rationale for the war, but I think sitting behind the desk in the Oval Office, as I was present for the president to do a number of times during our years together, I think sends a message to the American people about our resolve, our support for our troops. I expect he'll speak favorably about this mission. He'll update the American people on our progress, but I also expect there'll be a call out to our allies around the world about the need to come alongside America and make sure that we finish this job and don't just open the Strait of Hormuz, but that we make it clear that the free world will no longer tolerate the violence and terror that has flowed from Tehran for 47 years.
Well, on that call out to our allies, Mr. Vice President, making the ask now versus giving them warning and making the ask before these operations began, why would they answer the call at this time?
Well, because they're our allies, Kailey, and I'm particularly disappointed in the United Kingdom. I mean, really, since World War II, we've had what we call a special relationship with the United Kingdom, which, as I saw firsthand during my years in Congress and then when I was vice president, that when we go, the UK goes, but not this time. And I think Keir Starmer has fumbled in ways that are not reflective of the deep and abiding ties between the American people and the people of the UK. That being said, there have been other allies that have stood with us. The German Chancellor has spoken boldly about America and Israel taking the fight, which was also their fight to Tehran. But to see allies like Spain and even Italy are restricting access of U.S. air power to either their airspace or their bases, it's just unacceptable. I expect, knowing him as well as I do, I expect you'll hear the president speak out about that tonight. But look, at the end of the day, this was not a moment where America started a war a month ago. This was about a president and American military and courageous Israeli forces being willing to try and end a war that's been being waged against America, Israel, and the West for all those decades.
Beyond reconsideration were the two words that jumped off the page in the Daily Telegraph of London, the president suggesting that, in fact, he would not only consider pulling out of NATO, but is beyond the point of consideration. Are we going to hear about a withdrawal from this alliance tonight?
Well, I don't expect so.
Okay.
And of course, that'd take an act of Congress.
That's right.
To step out of a treaty.
Not that stopped this president before.
But look, when during our years, the president spoke boldly about the fact that most of our NATO allies were not living up to their own commitment to spend 3% of their GDP on our common defense. I was proud of the fact that before we left office together, the overwhelming majority of our NATO allies had invested some $120 billion in our common defense. In fact, NATO's ability to support Ukraine against that unprovoked invasion by Russia 4 years ago is largely owing to the buildup that we facilitated. So I expect there'll be some tough talk tonight by the president to our allies. The NATO alliance has literally kept the peace now for 3/4 of a century, and sending a message to our allies that we're in this together. They need to be together with America and with Israel. And my deep conviction and my hope is that we'll hear the president say tonight that we're gonna finish this fight once and for all. I think it's imperative that our forces, Israeli forces, continue to strike until two things happen. Number one is that the people of Iran are able to rise up
we
and
haven't
reclaim
heard as much
their own
about
country.
that notion in recent weeks.
Well, but it's, I can tell you, I've had the opportunity to meet people in the Iranian diaspora across this country and across the world. There are people hoping and praying that we will create enough space by striking at the internal security forces in Iran where the people can take to the streets as they did in January at great personal risk, and as they did 15 years ago in the Green Revolution, Kailey. But the other thing is I think it's imperative that we finish the job once and for all to restore deterrence on the world stage. Look, Beijing and Moscow are watching this conflict very closely. And if we were to stop short, if we were to take anything less than really a fundamental change in Iran and its ability to project force against others and its own people, I think that would only embolden authoritarian regimes around the world.
Even if it necessitates ground troops?
Well, I don't believe it will, but at the end of the day, I think allowing this regime, a terrorist regime, to retain power, even with new faces, would imperil America's interest, imperil Israel, and I think ultimately be a disservice to the lives that have been lost in the last month and to all of those that have been lost over the last 47 years. Look, as I said, I'm incredibly proud of our armed forces and the job that they've done. I'm proud of the president for pulling the trigger. But now I think it's essential that we finish the job once and for all, and I'm hoping to hear that from the commander-in-chief tonight.
When you think back to the first term and the conversations you had with the president, I'm just wondering if this was one that you were actively having then. Were there battle plans to deal with Iran at that point? And if that's the case, why didn't you decide to go in so many years ago?
Well, it was obviously your military is always developing contingency plans, but I can tell you what we did in the aftermath of 8 years of appeasement by the Obama administration was we got out of the Iran nuclear deal. We isolated Iran economically and diplomatically as never before. We unleashed our armed forces to take down the ISIS caliphate that was supported and sponsored by the mullahs in Tehran. And of course, the president made the decision in early 2020 to take out the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Qasem Soleimani. Iran was weaker and more isolated than ever before when we left office. Sadly, the Biden administration reversed all of that, went back to begging for another Iran nuclear deal. And so, our hope was that by bringing economic and diplomatic pressure and by strategically striking Iran, particularly its leadership during our time, that we'd set the conditions for change in that country's posture. But when this administration came in, the threat of a nuclear Iran, the president struck with Midnight Hammer a year ago and then unleashed the greatest armed forces in the history of the world a month ago. But again, this battle's been going on for 47 years since Iran, the mullahs came to power and took American hostages. And then they took 240 service members' lives when they attacked the Marine Corps barracks in Beirut in 1983. This is a fight we've got to finish. And I hope the president conveys to the world that we expect our allies to come alongside, and we're going to finish this fight. But
it seems that the finish you envision, Mr. Vice President, is a military one, not a diplomatic one. Do you see no real prospect for a deal, for a successful negotiation? Well,
I would tell you that I think the military makes the conditions possible for regime change. Look,
the president is arguing it is a new regime.
Well,
he says they're more reasonable.
I know the president's reflected on new and reasonable voices, and I hope he's right. I pray he's right. But the search for moderate mullahs in Tehran has been going on for decades. We can't seem to find any. But that's not true of the Iranian people. I want to say, with the global reach of this network, I've had the privilege to come to know people who fled Iran, whose families are still there. This is a very modern country, very Western oriented. It's a very young country. It has great aspirations and a great history and enormous potential. I think if we continue to use our armed forces and Israel continues to strike, we can create the conditions where the Iranian people will be able to take back their country, and the world will be better and safer and more secure. And again, restoring American credibility, particularly after that disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, I think has to be on the mind of policymakers as well.
$4.06 is the average price for a gallon of gas today, Mr. Vice President, and we've seen a huge increase, obviously, in crude oil and natural gas prices since this all began, and it makes it very difficult for the president to prosecute this war and affect his affordability agenda at the same time. You've seen this balancing act before. How long can our economy, how long can the politics of this war survive this cost of gas?
Well, I think that's what underscores the importance of tonight's address to the nation.
Does he need to address this?
Is explaining to the American people what the stakes are. And why it is in the interest of the security of the American people, of our cherished ally Israel, and frankly of peace and security in the world for us to finish this job in Iran.
And you think prices will drop precipitously when we leave, as the president says?
I would expect that if we secure, with the aid of our allies, the Strait of Hormuz, if we use force, I think one of the ideas that is most intriguing to me is to make it clear to the Iranians that even if they let their ships pass through the Strait of Hormuz, that the U.S. and our allied forces may consider taking possession of those ships and steering them into allies' harbors instead. So make it clear to Iran that they cannot control this strait, or there will be costs directly as well to them beyond every costs that they've paid. But look, there's lots of options on the table. I just think at the end of the day, hearing from the president tonight, the American people are going to understand better the stakes, understand the incredible progress our military has made, and I hope they hear the resolve of a commander-in-chief that says that we will not rest, we will not relent until the people of Iran have an opportunity to reclaim what I believe is their birthright of freedom.
Well, so that is how the president is going to end his day, addressing the American people from the White House. But he began his day, sir, at the Supreme Court, attending in a historic first arguments in the birthright citizenship case. He, of course, would like to see that right that is in the United States Constitution revoked. It seems that the justices are skeptical of that. It seems even the president himself knows that he's likely to lose this specific fight. So why wage it in the first place?
Well, look, the Supreme Court of the United States has never ruled on whether people that are here illegally and have children, that those children become American citizens. The famous case from the 19th century had to do with an Asian family that was in the United States legally at the time. As a permanent residence, if memory serves. And frankly, it was a case about an openly racist law against Asians in the country that the court rejected when they recognized birthright citizenship. But this was long before the global transportation that we have. It was long before modern immigration issues had emerged. And so I'm hopeful the Supreme Court will take a careful look at this. I believe at the end of the day that our immigration system is broken. This administration has done, as we did in our 4 years, extraordinary work securing the southern border of the United States, but the rest of the work remains to be done, is fixing a broken immigration system. But having the Supreme Court clarify unless you are here in a legal status and as the Constitution says, in a way that makes you subject to the jurisdiction thereof, as the 14th Amendment, that there ought to be limitations on this principle of birthright citizenship, and I hope they give it every consideration.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time if this court tells us that it's the purview of Congress that we've heard that in a ruling as well. And I'm wondering what you think about the status of your former House of Representatives when the Department of Homeland Security remains closed today, and the president taking to Truth Social right before you walked in the studio to suggest that the solution might just have to be reconciliation. Reconciliation 2.0 could bring funding for DHS, could be an attempted vehicle for the Save America Act, and so many other things. Is that how this finally ends?
Well, I hope it does end. Honestly, I just think it's unconscionable at a time that America is at war, that Democrats in Congress are withholding funding for the Department of Homeland Security. I was there when we set up the department after 9/11. I know the work that they do. It's far beyond airport screening. And the very idea that we have people who work at the very heart of protecting the American people here at home are not being paid is just unthinkable to me. And so first and foremost, I'd express that concern. But look, you make a great point about the role of the Congress here. As you know, I spent 12 years in the Congress of the United States before I was a governor and a vice president. And I believe that we deserve an energetic legislature. You talk about birthright citizenship. That's a constitutional 14th Amendment issue, but when I was in Congress, I supported a legislation that amended birthright citizenship. Likely expected it to go to the Supreme Court, but I think the American people are well served when we have a legislative process that is working, that's functioning. I get it that close, small majorities make that difficult. I think Speaker Mike Johnson has done yeoman's work in extending the tax cuts last year and in a number of the measures they've been able to enact. But the American people really want to see us get back to a Congress that is working their will, that's going through the legislative process, and particularly when it comes to the safety and security of the American people. Congress just needs to get back to work.
All right, Mr. Vice President, thank you so much for joining us today. Of course, the former Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio. He helping us walk through the many different storylines in politics we are watching today. But as always, we also have to keep a watch on financial markets. So let's get a check on those now with Charlie Pellet up in New York. Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kailey and Joe. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all pushing higher. We got a rally in U.S. equities that is accelerating as hopes grow that the war in the Mideast may be nearing a conclusion. So the S&P right now above 6,600, 6,608, looking at a gain of 79 points, up by about 1.2%. Dow Industrials up 448 on the Dow, a gain right now of 1%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 382 for NASDAQ. That is an advance of 1.8%. All of this with the VIX falling below 24, the 10-year at 4.30%, the 2-year 3.79%. Gold up 2.6%, $47.87 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude right now $99.38 a barrel. WTI falling by 2%. Barrel of Brent, the global benchmark, 101.06 right now for crude. That is a drop of 2.8%. So again, recapping here, stocks higher, S&P up 1.2% with the VIX below 24. And a retreat for crude, $99.39 now on WTI. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. A busy day in the markets. Obviously, as we've made you aware, a very busy day in politics and geopolitics. But that's not all, because we also have to consider that sometime after 6:24 p.m. this evening, we could see a liftoff of 4 American astronauts as they get set to head to the moon. Not land on it again, but setting the stage to do so. So we want to go live now to the Kennedy Space Center, where we find Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow ahead of this Artemis II launch, joined by a very important guest. Ed.
Yeah, and that guest is Mike Haridopolos, a Republican representing the absolute core of the Space Coast, where so much of the work for the Artemis program has taken place. Also chair of the House Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee. Congressman, there are a few that are gathered here today, probably as excited as you are about the potential of 6:24 p.m. Eastern Time. But summarise what it means to you and your constituents if we are to go off this evening.
Well, it's a part of our DNA. We are literally the Space Coast. This is where, of course, we launched to the moon the first time in 1969. And to see this happening again is so exciting for our community. It's great for our economy, but it's great for America. Coming together to wish these astronauts the best as they go around the moon for the first time since 1972. And as you've driven around this community, you've seen this, not just NASA, but commercial space is emerging here as well.
That's what I allude to, Congressman. You know, in your constituents, you have engineers, scientists that have been directly involved in this program. Is there any assessment you've done on the economic impact that something like the Artemis program has on the local economy here?
Oh, it's a tremendous boom. As we like to say, it's literally taking off. And all the jobs that come, not just from the big companies, but the small suppliers as well. So many of us were concerned about what would happen to the space industry after Barack Obama got rid of the shuttle program. We were afraid what would happen what happened after Apollo. But the exact opposite has happened. We've created public-private partnerships, like SpaceX are the ones who launched the satellites for communications or for military needs right here on the Space Coast, and has allowed our economy to boom. And so many people have found jobs here at NASA and at the private sector that has really changed the dynamic of our economy.
We probably don't have time for the full history lesson of the origins of the Artemis program, but essentially out of George W. Bush's administration, 2005, the Constellation program. Obama was not as focused on the moon. President Trump in his first administration was, and it was carried through to Biden, and now here we are. And as we sit here today, Congressman, there are many Americans who say we have problems enough as it is here in America, financial or otherwise. Why should we be excited about America returning to the moon?
Well, beyond, of course, the idea of exploring the world, or in this case, literally the space area, but this is about economics as well. It is so important that we have the technological power necessary to take on all challengers. And on the moon, you have things like helium-3 that can be, of course, a fuel for nuclear power here on Earth. You also have water on the moon, the South Pole. That's the area we really want to control, because when you have water, you have hydrogen, which is, of course, the propellant that lifts these rockets. And eventually, we believe we'll have a moon base on the moon that will allow us to launch to Mars, like we had all been talking about, especially Elon Musk. So this is a win-win. This grows our economy. This is private sector and public sector jobs, and it just shows anything's possible in America.
Our audience on Bloomberg Television and those listening on Bloomberg Radio can detect there is a bit of wind and there are some clouds in the sky. You seem incredibly upbeat about the prospects of 6:24 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, we always say in Florida, if you don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes. So we might be in the spot where, as of now, it looks like at least an 80% go. Hopefully these clouds will dissipate. We'll have the launch starting at 6:24. But we have about a 2-hour window. I'd actually love to see about a 7:30, 8 o'clock launch, have a nice scenic
to light up
view.
the sky.
It is. And if you see a launch at night, as you have, it's like having 12 noon in the middle of the night, because the power of this rocket, 8 million tons, and that's the equivalent of 130,000 NASCAR engines are on that rocket right now.
It would make it the most powerful human-rated launch system, because, of course, Starship, yet to carry humans on paper, is more powerful. A minute ago, we were talking about why the moon matters. You did not use the word China, but they have ambitions to get to the moon in 2030. How conscious are you and your subcommittee colleagues of that?
Well, we're very competitive, as you know. We beat the Soviets, the communists, the first time. We expect to beat them as well. We're going to get there, believe, in 2028. And remember, the Chinese do not share our values, whether it be for life or, that matter, the environment. What happens if they get there first? They might contaminate that water supply that would be vital to really cultivating the moon's opportunities. So the Chinese do not share also respect for law. There's a treaty in place since the 1960s. It says this is all the world's property. We're afraid that if they get there first, they might try to monopolize that. That's not good for the world.
Congressman, what is your assessment of the early tenure of Jared Isaacman as administrator of NASA? You know, it would appear that he's accelerated the Artemis program and indeed the ambitions of how soon Americans get to the moon?
Well, I give an A+. I mean, this guy has brought high energy, high intelligence, a clear vision of what NASA's future will be. Remember, this guy is a self-made billionaire. He's a guy who's been in space, who walked in space, is a pilot himself. I call him the American James Bond. And he really communicates well. He's really elevated the image of NASA and the direction you see that they're dominating in the news today. People see that this is the future. America is going to lead the way. And Jared has done a fantastic job early in his tenure.
You know, Bloomberg Balance of Power co-host Kailey Leinz made a really important point to me, which is, he outlined a plan just last week for $30 billion to establish a base on the moon. And to those in industry, $30 billion would seem like a lot. But when you consider what the Pentagon might get in defense, for example, where do you and your colleagues on the subcommittee sit on that, about the level of funding that NASA should be granted to achieve the goals as they are set out in the Artemis program?
Well, this is step one. This is just the beginning. We believe that if Artemis 2 is successful, like we anticipate, that we think the investment is worth it. Again, there's a lot of waste and fraud we've unfortunately found out in places like Illinois, in places like Minnesota, California. So we have the money when we spend the money smarter, but we also want to improve the technology, and the money is there, but we have to prove it every single day.
Is it being used the right way, Congressman? I mean, the Artemis program, the disclosure is it's been a $93 billion program, or roughly about $4 billion a launch. You know full well that the private players in your district, SpaceX and Boeing, can move pretty quickly. Has this been money well spent?
I think it has, because the technology we've been able to accrue from these emissions. And look, we're constantly asking these companies, can we do better? And you're seeing that with SpaceX, Blue Origin. They're creating amazing rocket systems. And the idea is that we think that it will happen in the future. But we have to rely right now on the SLS rocket. It's the only one that can propel us into space. And whether it be Blue or SpaceX or some other company, we think that's the future. Can't wait to see Starship launching here in the fall. That's the future. But for now, SLS is our ticket to ride, and we're going to ride it all the way.
Congressman Mike Haridopolos, a Republican representing a district that is at the heart of the Space Coast here in Florida and at Kennedy Space Station, where at 6:24 p.m. Eastern, guys, there's a good chance that Artemis 2 sends humans back toward the moon for the first time in more than 50 years. I send it back to the Balance of Power team.
Fantastic. Ed Ludlow, live from Florida. We thank you so much, Ed, on the Space Coast. We do hope that we see all of this take place tonight, and what's going to be a big night for American politics and American history. Of course, the political aspects of that launch are not lost on us, along with the price tag, something that Ed was talking to the congressman about. But of course, we have a primetime presidential address set for 9 p.m. Eastern. And following our conversation with former Vice President Mike Pence, what we just heard at Cape Canaveral, let's bring in our panel to hear from Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino. Bloomberg Politics contributors. Rick is our Republican strategist partner, Stonecourt Capital. Jeanne, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Jeanne, does the president seize on this tonight? This is a great American moment, assuming that the launch takes place, and he'll have a couple of hours to allow that to happen before he speaks at 9 o'clock. Is this not the American exceptionalism that this president wants to focus on?
It absolutely is. And I think he will definitely do that if they take off. And boy, does Ed Ludlow have the best job in the world. I'm just sitting here in awe. But he's got his work cut out for him, and that would be a really positive way for him to begin. But, this speech is a long time coming, where, 30 plus days into the war, he hasn't had a prime time address to the American public. And we know, looking at the polls, we've got about 60% of Americans who disagree with the war, which is a historic low. So absolutely, the president would be well advised to start with the Artemis and all of that positive exceptionalism that America brings to the world and into space at this point, and then address what we're doing in the Middle East.
But on that point, Rick, now that we are more than a month into this war, is it too late for an address of this kind to have the effect you would think is intended?
I would say it's never too late for the president to address the public on an issue of war and peace. And as we've talked previously over the last 6 weeks, this is one of the aspects of this war that's been desperately missed, is the president talking to the American public about what the goals and objectives are. What does he need to see happen in order to bring our soldiers home
safe. I should say sailors and soldiers. I get criticized otherwise from my Navy friends. At the end of the day, it's also an attempt for Donald Trump to make common cause with the American public, understand what their frustrations are. There's a lot of anxiety about the economy. This effort has made it harder for people in many ways economically, and I would think he would want to address that tonight to understand that even though his focus has been on the Middle East, on Iran as commander-in-chief, that he still understands the frustrations and the demands on his administration to lower the cost of living.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, thank you so much. And as we consider, Joe, the cost of living, that would be one audience that is presumably watching this address tonight, is the American people, the American electorate. But the question is that the audience the president primarily wants to speak to when he's told Reuters and other outlets that he has a message he wants to deliver to our NATO allies specifically? And we heard a little bit about that from his former vice president as well.
There might be a bit of a scolding this evening as he floats the idea of withdrawing from NATO in an interview with the Daily Mail. It's pretty interesting that we could have a couple of different speeches in one. We're told it'll be about 20 minutes long, and we're going to bring it to you live here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Speaking of $4 a gallon gas and the cost of oil, Tom Kloza will join us coming up next right here on Bloomberg.
The equity market, at least, feeling optimistic today. We'll see if the president provides more fuel to that optimism when he speaks from the White House at 9 p.m. Eastern time, coverage of which, of course, will bring you live on Bloomberg TV and radio. But we haven't actually had to wait until 9 p.m. to hear from the president today. He's been quite active on Truth Social, most recently, Joe, posting about funding the Department of Homeland Security, ICE and CBP specifically. Looks like he's advocating for reconciliation. We've also, of course, heard from him regarding the war in Iran, that Iran has requested a ceasefire. He needs to see the Strait of Hormuz open first. But he too weighed in on the case that was being heard in the Supreme Court today around birthright citizenship, posting on Truth Social a short time ago, "We are the only country in the world stupid enough to allow birthright citizenship." It's not actually true. There's some 30-odd countries that also have laws like this. Right. But it does seem that the president is reading the writing of the wall on how this court is going to rule on this one.
Yeah, I don't know how stupid this will seem once the court rules, but apparently there is some skepticism surrounding the president's case here, and that is what we expected. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall spent the morning at the Supreme Court as the president made history. He attended the arguments in person, did not talk to reporters while he was there. But Tyler talked to a lot of other folks. It was a rambunctious, very loud, noisy crowd. A lot of protesters showed up just for the actual arguments as the justices questioned whether this executive order issued by the president could be squared with the Constitution and federal law. Tyler's made her way back to the White House. Let's see how things are going right now with, of course, the primetime address set for 9 p.m. Eastern time in that building right behind Tyler. Did the president have any other opportunities to weigh in here, Tyler? Do we expect to hear him talk about this tonight?
When it comes to the birthright citizenship ruling or Iran, because of course, Joe, birthright citizenship, beyond what Kailey just read with the president's post on Truth Social there, that's really all that we've heard from him. We knew that he had an Easter lunch today at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. He has a 3 p.m. policy meeting. Perhaps that will open up to reporters. Other than that, our eyes are just absolutely trained on 9 p.m. Eastern tonight. I can say at the moment it is a lot quieter here where I am now compared to when you and I spoke last hour outside of the Supreme Court, and we really saw President Trump make history here, becoming the first sitting U.S. president to attend oral arguments in the modern era where these justices are deciding what really is a key policy and a hardline immigration tactic that this White House is doubling down on. So one to watch out for sure. As you guys have mentioned on the program, though, today was just to get those signals from the justices on how they could be voting. Bloomberg News' assessment is that those justices were skeptical of the arguments from the Trump administration when it comes to President Trump's executive order seeking to bar U.S.-born children of undocumented immigrants from gaining citizenship. But at this point, the case isn't decided. We're expecting that to happen, though, before the end of June when the court's term is ultimately up.
All right, so the justices obviously have some decisions to make and some time to do so. The president, arguably, Tyler, also has some decisions to make on a shorter timeline when it comes to Iran. He told reporters last night 2 to 3 more weeks of this conflict. Should we expect echoes of that in his address tonight?
Kailey, at this point, a White House official tells us here at Bloomberg News that this is going to be an operational update. In their words, when it comes to what is happening on the ground in Iran, we are expecting this to be a tactical update, as this White House has really been trying to tout the tactical successes. And President Trump yesterday reiterating that the U.S.'s main goal here is to ensure that Iran is unable to get a nuclear weapon. But the question about what a potential off-ramp could look like has really been fueled over the last 24 hours, because you had President Trump yesterday suggesting that he does not need an agreement to be in place in order to cease U.S. military operations in Iran. But then, of course, we heard from him earlier today demanding that the Strait of Hormuz be open before the U.S. agrees to any potential ceasefire. Iran has pushed back that they have even offered that a ceasefire could be on the table as we try to delineate where potential diplomatic talks stand now. As you both well know, the White House maintains that negotiations are indeed ongoing. We heard from Secretary Pete Hegseth just yesterday saying that they were gaining strength, though at this point, Iran maintains that they are not in these formal talks with the U.S.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live at the White House, where we will be hearing from the president later. Thank you so much. And of course, a big question on the market's mind is how will the president, if at all, address the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz? This is an issue specifically that the oil market is fixated on, but of course has broader ramifications for the global economy. And it's something we discussed on Balance of Power last evening with the CEO of the American Petroleum Institute, Mike Summers, whose, of course, member companies are in theory benefiting from higher oil prices, but who issued a warning about the necessity of reopening the strait.
The bottom line is we have to get the strait open, and we have to get it open soon. If the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, prices are going to remain at an elevated level. The pain on consumers is just going to be too high. So the top priority has to be to get the strait open as quickly as possible.
So for more on this, we turn to Tom Kloza, Chief Energy Advisor for Gulf Oil, who is here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Tom, I'm curious if you agree with Mike's assessment. When we have the president saying things like, as soon as the U.S. leaves, the strait will automatically be open, what's the consequence if it is not?
I think the consequence is we go higher and oil prices become an abstraction. And I would probably counter some of the things that the president's saying with the notion that, you know, we've seen a regime change, and the regime change is not in Iran. The regime change is in the people that operate in the Strait of Hormuz. And even if there's peace or progress on peace, we're probably looking at weeks of that strait having at least some sort of modified traffic. So today is an interregnum. Today maybe look back as a day where, well, the president jawboned the market down, but I think the market's going higher.
Wow, interesting. Well, Tom, it's always great to talk with you because we have so many armchair quarterbacks when it comes to the energy market here, and you actually know what traders are saying, what the sentiment is in the oil pits. If the president simply reiterates 2 to 3 week timeline, for instance, and does not actually get more detailed on withdrawal or reopening of the strait, how disappointed might this market be?
I think, you know, I created a word earlier called hyperparabolic, you know, kind of hyperbole plus parabola. And I think that's what we might be looking at shortly, because we've lost somewhere, and, you know, we're starting to see the barrel counters among the big banks, and some of them are estimating that we've lost 500 million barrels of crude oil, refined products, and petrochemicals. I mean, to say that's unprecedented is to say that night is unprecedented in daylight. I mean, it's just an incredible loss. And that was the buffer. That was the buffer, and you could argue that that's why crude oil prices didn't really go parabolic. But if it looks as though we're going to have intermittent traffic or obstructed traffic in the month of April, we're in trouble.
Well, the president would argue that the U.S. can help with that. On True Social yesterday, he was saying even when it comes to products like jet fuel, the U.S. has plenty of it. Allies can either get it from us or go take it themselves in the Strait of Hormuz. To what extent is U.S. production able to compensate here, Tom?
You know, Kailey, this is a 3-ring circus. And until now, 2 of the rings have just seen incredible price spikes, that being Asia and Africa and Europe. Now it looks as though the United States or North America may join the rings. In the past couple of days, I can tell you that in the last 3 years, I never saw any cargoes put together in New York Harbor. You know, those big tanks you pass on the way to the city? They never load for export, but we've seen 5 or 6 cargoes loaded for export. A couple of them jet fuel and a few of them diesel. It's wonderful, and it's great for capitalism to send it overseas where the prices are higher, but ultimately it may end up biting us in the behind.
Really interesting. I want to get into the price of gas here, Tom. We're at $4.06. If you see another parabolic move in oil prices, what's the next stop for gas? And I realize this is a national average. The price being paid in California is a lot different than what I'm paying in Virginia, for instance. But how worried are you about this spike continuing, even if crude oil does not?
I think that they have some levers they're going to pull, even though those levers may not make sense. For example, I do think that we would see a federal tax holiday, and that's 18 cents of wherewithal then. I don't think you'll see anything like the president asking for people to make sacrifices, even though you can make a compelling argument that if you pay a little bit more for fuel now and you have a nuclear-free Iran for the next 50 years, that's a pretty good swap. So it's going to be really interesting. I can tell you, Joe, that one of the numbers that frightened me today came in the Energy Information report, and it showed gasoline imports on the East Coast of less than 100,000 barrels a day. That number probably doesn't resonate with a lot of people, but it's about 20% of what we're used to. And the East Coast, which is, of course, houses the CME contract for RBOB futures, is a market that we have to watch very, very closely. If we're not going to get European or foreign gasoline into the Northeast, we could see tighter supply here, and that could really lead to higher prices throughout the continent.
Well, but then we get into the question as to whether or not at some point if higher prices are going to be the cure for higher prices, Tom. At what levels do you expect material demand destruction to kick in?
Somewhere between 4 and 5. We're at the Ted Williams number now, 406. That's a dated reference, but I'm an old guy. I think somewhere between 450 and 495 or whatever, you do get into demand destruction. Now, one thing's going to help offset some of the gasoline demand destruction, and that's the price of jet fuel, the high fares, and the nonsense that you have to go through when you go to airports. You could make a strong case that there might be a little bit more on-the-road travel this year than there will be in the airways. I don't know about you, but I'm not looking forward to the next time I go to an airport, even though I booked it and got the fares a month or so ago.
I'm supposed to go to the airport with a 7-month-old baby tomorrow. So I cannot tell you how much I'm dreading it.
This is going to be fine. I just know he's going to be a great traveler, Tom. When you think about all of the derivatives, though, which one do you worry about the most? Is it the doubling in jet fuel? Is it gasoline at $4? Or should I be asking you about diesel or something else?
No, I think jet fuel is going to be okay. And I think, one of the big helps there is that we've got this huge new refinery in Nigeria that probably can't make gasoline for North America, but could make a lot of jet fuel. The typical refinery might make 9% of its yield on the jet fuel side. So I think that'll correct. It's just that was a product that was so low in storage. We don't store jet fuel a lot. You store gas oil and heating oil and diesel. And to a certain extent, you store gasoline, although you have the problem of the winter gasoline is inappropriate for use in the spring and summer. And by the way, you're going to see that in the Northeast. If you think that prices in the Northeast are moving up a little bit higher than normal, that's because they are. And it's because we're switching from the winter blend, where you have a lot of cheap components, into the summer blend, where you don't.
Tom, we have just about a minute left here. Just quickly, if for whatever reason the U.S. isn't able to secure the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, if Iran is successful in implementing fees to transit the strait of some $2 million, how would that translate into the actual price of the product on those vessels?
I think that if we have an impeded Strait of Hormuz in the month of April, we are looking at 130, 140, and then all sorts of numbers. There is some symmetry in the market that indicates a possibility of going as high as 200 to 240. How they're going to implement that, I don't know. Do they have an easy pass in the Persian Gulf? Maybe they can do something like that. But it's likely to be wrought with corruption and problems or whatever. So we really need the Strait to be reopened. I don't agree that often with Mike Summers from API, but I agree with him on that.
That says a lot from Tom Kloza. We learn a lot every time we talk to Tom, and we thank you so much. Chief Energy Advisor for Gulf Oil. We've got a lot left today, and we'll meet you at 5 p.m., the late edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and Radio.